first thing I'm going to talk about is maximizing the wrist. Now here's a couple pictures here of a middle infielder from the A's, and this is the phenom from Japan that was just signed by the Rangers. And you'll notice something common in their wrist. Both of them are hooking the ball like this. Now there's a reason for that. And this is something that you have to teach some kids to do. Some kids do this naturally. They've just done it from day one. But sometimes they need to actually learn it. The thing is, our wrist is a very flexible joint, okay, the way it's made. I can go in any direction, and it's very flexible. I can do a lot of stuff with it, okay? My elbow is only made to do this. That's the only way our elbow is supposed to move. My shoulder really is only capable of being strong until I lift my arm above my shoulder. Once I move my arm above my shoulder, I lose a lot of strength in my shoulder. My arms are meant to work below my shoulders, okay? So that's a big reason why there's so many arm injuries in baseball, is because everything occurs in the throwing motion, most everything, over the arm. And this is not the way the shoulder is supposed to move with a lot of stress. So if you look in the construction world, you look at guys who are painters, who are constantly working over their head. You look at guys who are installing drywall. Over time, many of them develop shoulder problems, rotator cuff problems and everything, because all their stress is above their shoulder. And the shoulder is just not meant to be in this position during stressful times. The arms are meant to be down here. So you have the elbow joint that only moves like this, but in baseball, we bend it way back like that. It's not meant to do this. Shoulder is meant to move like this. That's why at North Penn, for North Penn softball, they can have one pitcher on the team, and that one pitcher in North Penn softball can pitch every single inning of every single game, because the force of the pitch underhand happens down here, and that's the natural movement of the shoulder. So that's why there's no stress for the most part. That's the way your arm is supposed to move. Baseball, you're up here. That's why the Phillies need at least 10 pitchers, because of the stress. So there's no such thing as perfect mechanics in baseball, because even if you have good mechanics, you're working against the way the shoulder is supposed to move and against the way the elbow is supposed to move. So in order to make up for that and take as much stress off these joints, I have to use the very flexible wrist. Okay? So a kid who uses that wrist and is very flexible and gets that snap on his wrist is taking stress away from his elbow and his shoulder. But that's not how a lot of kids throw. They flat wrist things. They take the ball out of their glove and their wrist is flat. They come up here and their wrist is flat, and they throw with a flat wrist from start to finish. So they're not using the most flexible part of their arm when they throw. So the less I use my wrist, the more I have to use my elbow and my shoulder. And we already said the elbow and the shoulder are not meant to do what we ask it to do. So part of improving your velocity is getting a lot more out of your wrist, a flexible wrist. Now, one way to do that, and as kids get older, the looser they hold the ball, the more that unlocks the wrist. As soon as I tighten up and I squeeze that ball, it locks the wrist, and now I'm using more elbow and shoulder. So being nice and loose with that ball, you hear some coaches say, put some space in between the hand and the ball. Older kids can do that because they have bigger hands, okay? But we generally want kids to hold the ball loose enough so that the ball's not going to come out of their hand, but not tight enough where it locks the wrist. And I give the analogy, you know, if a woman is walking down the street and she's holding her pocketbook, she's not grabbing that pocketbook and squeezing it. She's just lightly holding it. But have someone come up from behind her and try to take the pocketbook, your hand will instinctively grab the pocketbook. You don't even think about it, you do it. Well, the same principle applies with a baseball. If I hold the ball very lightly in my fingertips and I allows my wrist to be very loose and smooth, when I get to the point where I have to let go of the ball, my fingers will tighten up on that ball enough so that the ball does not slip out of my hand. It will happen naturally. So some kids are afraid, well, the ball's going to slip out. It's generally not going to, okay? Very much like the pocketbook thing there. But both players there are starting with a flexible wrist. It's bent here, and they're going to get a lot of snap on their wrist, which is going to not only help their arm, but it's going to get them a little extra velocity too. And if you were to stand behind home plate of a major league pitcher, one of the things scouts will say, man, that guy has life on the end of his fastball. And the ball just like explodes. It comes out of his hands and it goes and just seems to just, the last 10 feet, just take off. And the physics teacher will probably say that's impossible, but every scout in America will say that. He's got life on the end of his fastball. The ball just kind of takes off at the end and becomes harder to hit. A lot of that has to do with how much he uses his wrist and snaps his wrist and gets a little bit more out of his arm than just flat wristing the ball. So there's a couple drills, or actually one drill that I like a lot with little kids, is they stand, and you've probably seen this drill before, and they can stand in front of a wall, and they hold their elbow up, and they put their wrist all the way back, and they just do this, okay? They're not so much interested in bending at the elbow, they're just doing back and forward. And it's really not a throwing drill, because you don't throw from here. You're out here somewhere. So you're not teaching them proper throwing in terms of where the ball should be. You're teaching them what the wrist should be doing. You're getting them to relax that wrist and getting the full range of motion out of the most flexible part of my arm, and that's the wrist. So when you watch players, many times they do have that extra snap on the ball and using that wrist, and that in and of itself can help kids get a little more velocity on their fastball at any age, just using that wrist a little bit more.